5 Strangest UFO Sightings by Astronauts. UFO sighting credibility by regular people can be questionable, but what if the sightings come from those who have actually visited space? The interesting cases on this list are UFO reports given by those while outside of Earth's atmosphere. These are the 5 strangest UFO sightings by astronauts. Number 5. Major Gordon Cooper. Part of the first manned space program in the United States, Project Mercury, Leroy Cooper Jr. first served in the United States Marine Corps during World War II. By 1949, he was commissioned into the Air Force as a fighter pilot and was selected to be an astronaut in 1959. In 1963, he was part of the longest and the last Mercury spaceflight. During that mission, he became the first American to spend a full day in space and also became the last American to have a solo orbital mission. Even though the mission was haunted by several equipment malfunctions, Cooper manually guided his spacecraft to a splashdown just 4 miles from his recovery ship. With more than 200 hours spent in space, what's most interesting about Gordon is his vocal accounts of experiencing UFOs in his lifetime. It was May 15, 1963, when he shot into space on board the Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey. Nothing unusual happened on the first 21 orbits, but during his final one, Cooper reached out to a tracking station in Muchia, close to Perth, Australia, and said he was seeing a weird glowing greenish object quickly approaching his capsule. While the radio team on the ground were confused with his statement at first, the Muchia radar then picked up the unidentified craft. Curiously, this exchange was recorded and reported by the National Broadcasting Company, who was covering the orbit journey's every detail. But when Cooper landed, the press was told he wouldn't be answering any questions about the greenish orb or UFO sighting. He kept quiet for a while, but later on, Cooper became vocal about his experiences. He relayed that during his years of service as an Air Force pilot in Western Germany in 1951, he saw a metallic, saucer-shaped disc at a considerable altitude. The disc outmaneuvered the fighter pilot jets the Americans had, including the F-86 Sabre jet he was using. Then in May of 1957, Cooper and his team were doing rocket test launches at Edwards Air Force Base in California. A special camera was set up to record the launches, but 50 yards away from their team, an unusual saucer-shaped craft hovered silently in the air. Slowly, it began to descend with 3 legs stretching out from underneath it as the vehicle settled onto the ground. As his team made their way towards the craft, it then rose back up before disappearing at great speeds, and it did all this without any sound. Cooper called the Pentagon to report what they saw, and he was told to package the filming camera and send it to them right away. After sending off the camera and film, he never got it back or heard anything about the event ever again. In 1978, Cooper sent out an open letter to the United Nations pleading with them to release information about UFO encounters all over the world, as well as to initiate peaceful contact. According to Cooper, there's a large amount of information held from the general public, and that huge cover-ups are done by NASA and various branches of the government all the time. He also claims aliens are here on Earth, and in one instance on a military base he said they brought one in. Even during his death, Cooper remained a firm believer that there are UFO encounters and sightings that happen every day. Number 4. Vladimir Kovalyonok's exploding UFO. While we may be most familiar with American astronauts, Russian cosmonauts also have their own UFO stories to share, and one of the strangest is one coming from cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalyonok. On May 5, 1981 at 6 p.m., he was on board the Salyut and flying over an area of South Africa, heading towards the Indian Ocean. When he looked through the porthole, that's when he saw an object he couldn't explain. He elaborated that he couldn't tell the exact size or distance of the object because it's impossible to do this in space with nothing up there to compare it to. He further relayed the object flew with us. He described it as being oval-shaped and as flying straight. Then out of nowhere, a golden-colored explosion happened. According to him, it was beautiful to watch. Moments after the explosion, a second one occurred and 2 spheres appeared, both golden and beautiful as he described. After witnessing the explosion, initially all he could see were white clouds of smoke. Soon after, the Salyut entered the Terminator, which is the difference between day and night, flying eastwards to the darkness of Earth. He relayed that after that, he never saw the spheres again. Vladimir said they weren't able to capture images of the explosion. However, a more astonishing story about UFO encounters happened days later, between May 14th and 18th of 1981. The two-man crew of the Soyuz T-4 had docked with the Salyut 6. The crews were scheduled to stay in orbit for 75 days doing various experiments. While Vladimir was doing one of these, he saw a round object that he guessed was about a kilometer away from where they were. He alerted his fellow crew members, and they took a camera and recorded about 45 minutes worth of footage. The UFO remained in its position for most of the day, but the following day, it had moved and now was just 100 meters away from their craft. The cosmonauts could see it clearly and could tell that it had a 3-story level with about 24 windows all around. They could also see 3 humanoid figures with helmets on their faces. Despite the helmets, the cosmonauts could still see the creatures' faces and described them as having straight noses and big eyebrows, but with no facial expressions. When the cosmonauts saw the beings seemed friendly, they asked permission from Earth to see if they could establish visual as well as physical contact. The visual contact was granted, but the physical contact wasn't. In an attempt to communicate with the creatures, Vladimir opened a map of the universe to the beings, and they answered by opening their own map, but theirs was far more detailed. The beings pointed to the Milky Way galaxy, and Vladimir answered in the positive, and the beings also responded in the same gesture. Afterwards, the ship went away very fast, reappeared, and then disappeared again. It did this about 6 times, and the cosmonauts weren't sure what this was all about. Afterwards, Vladimir tried to communicate in Morse code using a strong flashlight, but there was no answer. He also tried speaking in English as well as in binary code. The following day, the beings were flying just outside of their ship, and the cosmonauts requested permission again to disembark, but this was denied. Then, on the 4th day, the ship disappeared. According to the story, on June 18th of that year, the Gosplan held a meeting involving several authorities, cosmonauts, and ufologists. Vladimir and 2 other cosmonauts were present, and it was here that they presented the film they took capturing the UFOs and its beings. Today, though, this footage remains unseen by the public and has been kept secret ever since. Number 3. James Lovell and Frank Borman. Project Gemini is NASA's second human spaceflight program, right between Mercury and Apollo. The project began in 1961 and ended in 1966. Headed by a 2-man crew, there were approximately 10 Gemini missions in total, flying at low Earth orbit between 1965 and 1966. The project was made to test travel techniques and equipment for the ambitious Project Apollo and the landing of a man on the moon. Project Gemini tested how long it would take to go to the moon and back, as well as perfect the conditions of working outside of a spacecraft, and also created orbital maneuvers for docking and space rendezvous. It was Gemini's job to perform and perfect these techniques so the Apollo astronauts could do theirs with ease. Gemini launches were done at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station in Florida using the Gemini Titan II booster rocket. The first 2 Gemini programs were unmanned and used to check if the equipment would work without a hitch. It was in Gemini 3 when the first 2-man crew of Grissom and Young did 3 successful orbits on March 23, 1965. It was followed by a June launch with McDivitt and White, the latter of which became the first man to ever perform a spacewalk. Both White and McDivitt also had a weird UFO sighting. When their craft was flying over Hawaii, they saw an unidentified metallic object with long arms sticking out of it. McDivitt is said to have taken pictures of the craft, but these photographs have never been released. Gemini 5 carried astronauts Cooper and Conrad and was the first to do a week-long flight using fuel cells for power. The crew completed about 120 orbits of Earth, but it would be Gemini 7 that would prove to be the most memorable in terms of UFO lore. On board Gemini 7 were astronauts James Lovell and Frank Borman. The goal of the mission was to see if humans could live in space for 14 days. In December of 1965, the astronauts launched into orbit, and on the second day, they reported some unusual circumstances to the command center. Borman got on the radio and reported they were seeing an unidentified aircraft some distance away from their capsule. The Gemini control personnel at Cape Kennedy told them they were seeing the Titan booster rockets. Borman confirmed that they were seeing the booster rockets all right, but there were other crafts in the vicinity as well. The conversation between the astronauts and Capcom are fully recorded, and you could hear the astronauts stating what they were seeing. A transcript of the exchange went something like this. Lovell, bogey at 10 o'clock high. Capcom. This is Houston. Say again, 7? Lovell. Said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Capcom. Gemini 7. Is that the booster, or is that an actual sighting? Lovell. We have several actual sightings. Capcom. Estimated distance or size? Lovell. We also have the booster in sight. This exchange is both baffling and terrifying if you realize Lovell and Borman weren't seeing anything coming from Earth. What's more, they knew it wasn't the booster, but other flying objects in the area. The idea that space flights are monitored by extraterrestrial beings is something that's both fascinating and unsettling as well. Number 2. Musa Mantorov films UFO. A former colonel in the Soviet Air Force, Musa Mantorov is considered to be a veteran of the Russian space program. He became a cosmonaut on December 1, 1978, and flew as a flight engineer at the Soyuz TM-4 until December 21, 1988. He is also known by another feat as being the man with the longest continuous time spent in space, totaling to 176 days. He basically observed Earth from above and performed about 20 spacewalks during that time. Overall, his total space-time amounts to 541 days. However, on March 31, 1991, cosmonaut Mantorov was up in space inside the Mir space station watching the docking of a visiting space capsule nearby. He found it interesting, so he filmed the encounter. However, while he was filming the docking, he captured something else intriguing. He caught a craft, or an object that looked to be cigar-shaped, coming out from behind the spacecraft. He continued to point his camera at the odd object as it floated downwards away from the capsule. He knew for sure it wasn't space junk, as some people have claimed, because at one point it glowed a fiery red as if ignited or had boosters. According to Mantorov, he was baffled at what he was looking at and considered the various possibilities of what it could be. His footage of the cigar-shaped UFO in outer space is considered to be one of the best proofs of an alien craft ever captured, and it truly is something to see. Number 1. Dr. Franklin Musgrave. While astronauts relaying their account of UFOs seen from space may seem far-fetched for some, at least one astronaut comes with an even more bizarre type of UFO sighting. American doctor and retired NASA astronaut Franklin Story Musgrave is considered to be one of the more academically inclined of all the astronauts that have ever flown on any U.S. space mission. He has earned 6 academic degrees, and he is also the only astronaut to have flown inside all 5 space shuttles. Pretty much when you look at Musgrave's background, you'd be hard-pressed to find fault in his credentials. With a throng of accolades and badges of honor, the last thing you would expect from him to describe is seeing a UFO that seems to look like a space eel or snake. According to Musgrave himself, he's seen a lot of unusual things while he was in orbit. But one thing stands out above the rest, and they're what he calls Story Snake. In fact, he's not only seen them once, but twice. He says that he's not sure how large this object is or how far away it was, but he describes it as having internal motions, almost like a very flexible rubber hose, but you can see it just swimming out there like an eel. Although he says it could be a piece of a hose that had gotten dislodged or become debris during takeoff, he added that he has seen all kinds of glorious light shows and 4th of Julys while he was out there. Curiously, he captured the said snake-like thing from the window of a spacecraft. His videos are interesting. It would definitely cause one to pause and wonder what this thing could be. Since space is so unexplored, it really could be anything. So there were the 5 strangest UFO sightings by astronauts. The truth about what UFOs actually are remains up for debate, but with so many credible witnesses, like these astronauts and cosmonauts, it's hard to deny the evidence that there most certainly are some strange things out there in space that we simply know nothing about. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We have new videos coming out every Wednesday and Saturday, so be sure to check those out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.